All right, so we're here at day 3. We've passed the halfway mark, and I'm very glad to see that so many of you are still with us. A few of the Australian friends who wanted to join haven't been able to join because it's a working week here, and it's also school holidays as well. So they're on holidays with their family and children. But we're back here and we're looking at the significance of learning the Dharma. So from day 2, yesterday's material, I hope you've begun to see how we can use the Dharma like a mirror in many different ways. And I hope you continue to explore as you learn the Dharma. Start seeing how else you can use the Dharma as a mirror when you're learning to recognize things, when you're learning about certain qualities and so forth, whether it's qualities relating to the arahats, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas. I don't think it's just for them. You know, you can start to think, well, as a mirror, how can I slowly be able to see those qualities in myself when I look into this wonderful Dharma mirror? So I hope you can practice using the Dharma as a mirror more and more each time as your own Dharma studies and learning develops as well. So yesterday we covered the end of verse 3, which was the sentence teaching us that the Dharma is like a mirror. A simple sentence, but a very important sentence. And then we looked at verse 4, which highlights the importance of having good spiritual companions, good teachers, as we walk this path of the Buddhist practice. And in order to find these people, we need to recognize what are the qualities that will make one qualified to be a good spiritual guide. So when we reflect on that, on others, when we're trying to see, is that person a potential good spiritual companion for me? We then also reflect, well, can I be a good spiritual companion? What do I need to fulfill those qualities myself? Now, ideally, a good spiritual guide would have all of those 5 qualities we discussed yesterday. And I'll assume you've all remembered it, so I won't present it again. But review those qualities regularly so that you know them by heart, and you can start to check yourself and check others as well. But to actually find a person with all these 5 qualities, that person is an exceptional being who more than likely would have already had partial or full experience of awakening. So those type of people are very hard to come by in our present era. Unlike in the Buddha's days where the Buddha himself was present, so the perfect spiritual guide, and then you had all the arahats and the various great disciples and senior monks. And nowadays, we're not so lucky to be able to meet with the Buddha, but we still need teachers. So if we can find people, they don't have to be monastics, they could be fellow practitioners. As long as their practice, their understanding, their cultivation has aspects that supersede ours, or aspects that they have accomplished which we have not, then they are people we can learn from. And in particular, we want to learn those aspects that we're still missing. So anybody with a fraction of accomplishment in those 5 qualities, we can approach them, we can associate with them and learn from them, just as we would if we were to have met with the Buddha. So after finding these good spiritual teachers, companions, and friends, we move on to verse 5. And this gives us information about how do we be a good student. So the teacher, we have expectations of the teacher, which are those 5 qualities. Vice versa, there should be expectations on ourselves as students. So how should we interact with these teachers, with these spiritual companions, so that we can actually benefit from associating with them? We can benefit from their guidance, their advice, and their encouragement. So remember that as a student, generally we should follow their advice. We should heed their advice. But also remember that unless they are a Buddha, they are not perfect. So they will still have some shortcomings. And with that in mind, we don't follow blindly. If we find a teacher, some people do become, they idolize their teacher. And so they just assume everything the teacher tells them must be correct. And so they follow blindly. But here, given we're learning from Venerable Yin-Shun, who values wisdom, I need to stress, don't follow blindly, especially when the instructions given are questionable from a moral perspective. So learn the precepts, learn the Vinaya, so that you have a reliable standard of measure to judge and regulate your own behavior and to measure the instructions given to you by your teachers. So on this aspect, I'd just like to touch on a point that Nico mentioned yesterday in Venerable Tangzi's talk. So she asked a question about how can a situation turn bad? And if my memory is correct, it's, basically how can someone who's practicing the Dharma in earnest turn bad? So basically it's like, how can an angel turn into a devil? So if one, theoretically, if one practices steadily, diligently, has good teachers that are giving them the right teachings and they're understanding it correctly and implementing it correctly, theoretically, things should just be going in the direction of improvement and positivity. So that's the theoretical perspective. But we must remember we're humans. Human beings don't just have a rational aspect. We have an emotional aspect as well. And at times when our emotions overpower us, our rationality becomes weaker. And under certain conditions, when we face, dramatic changes, if we can't deal with it rationally and our emotions take over, even a good Buddhist practitioner can be swept away by their emotions. And sometimes these emotions can turn detrimental. So whether it's depression or anger or frustration, it can lead them astray. So it's very possible. It is a possibility for Dharma practitioners to go the other way, so to speak. And so that's why we must try and use the Dharma as a mirror and reflect regularly. And when I mean regularly, ideally you do it maybe daily or at least weekly, but certainly not like the saying where people on New Year's Day make a New Year's resolution, so they only reflect on themselves once a year. So use the Dharma like a mirror and reflect regularly so that you keep check of yourself. And through your practice, you should be able to slowly tame the emotions and allow wisdom to guide you and allow your compassion to guide you rather than to be overtaken by your past habits and emotions. So that's the reality we face. We are humans, and until you practice to a very advanced level, there is the very real possibility that if you're faced with a very difficult situation, you fall back into your past, or you push the Dharma aside, or you forget about the Dharma and the teachings and so forth. So today we will begin with verse 6. So the ancient masters taught that meeting good spiritual guides is rare, and encountering the Buddha Dharma is also rare. Now, when one comes across these rare and precious encounters, one must not guard these meetings as commonplace. It should be known that to encounter the Buddha Dharma, according to the Buddhist teachings, one must avoid 8 difficulties, and this is captured in the following verse. Avoid the sufferings of the 3 evil realms. Avoid rebirth in the longevity heavens. Born in a time and place where the Buddha Dharma prevails. Possess a complete body without erroneous views. So this is the next verse. I'll give you some time to copy it down. And here I'd just like to say, I mentioned just then, not to treat the encounter with the Dharma as commonplace. We're very fortunate. If you think about your situation, you have Bodhi Monastery in New Jersey where you guys have regular Saturday meetings. And sometimes once you get so used to it, it becomes like, oh, yeah, it's another Saturday, Faye's there again, Larry's there again, and so forth. So we can take it as commonplace, or we start to think, well, it's always going to be there. But just remember, we don't know when it will not be there, and we don't know when we won't be able to attend anymore. So when we're able to attend and meet with the Dharma, we should treat each encounter as precious and rare and make the most of it. So just let me know when everyone's copied it down. If not, I can put this up again during the 10-minute break. I'll continue because you'll see parts of this verse as we go through the next few slides, so you can fill it in then as well. So the first of the 8 difficulties is that one must avoid births in the 3 evil realms. And the 3 evil realms refers to the hells, the animal, and the hungry ghost realms. So what that means is we need to avoid being reborn into any of these 3 realms. And we then have, because if we're born into any of these 3 realms, we will have to suffer the karmic retribution of those 3 realms. And namely, the conditions of those 3 realms are not suitable to hearing the Dharma. So if you think about it, the Buddha came to us as a human. So his teachings, his instructions, and even his precepts are tailored to human beings. They're not for the hell beings. They're not for the hungry ghost beings. They're not for the animals as well. So the obvious one is just think about animals. We won't be able to, you can try and teach your dog the Dharma. You can try and teach your cat the Dharma. But how much of it will they be able to understand? That's highly questionable. Now, for some people who have read a few sutras, they may actually question, well, what about the powerful ghost king and the Naga king and their entourage, which we read about? So the ghost king is from the ghost realm and the Naga king is from the animal realm. And you see in some of the sutras, particularly the Mahayana sutras, you see that they attended with their entourage the Buddha's sermons, and they were able to hear the teachings from the Buddha. So yes, if you read the Mahayana teachings at the beginning, sometimes when they introduce who's in the audience, you will see that there are these beings from the other realms. But we need to bear in mind that those conditions are very rare. You need to ask yourself, how much can you guarantee that if you're born in the animal realm, you will be born as the Naga King, with those abilities, with those virtues and so forth? So those instances are extremely, extremely rare. And even if you're born as the Naga King and you can attend the Buddha's sermons, one thing you need to know, that the Buddhism we have with us now, those beings cannot take the full monastic precepts and enter the monastic sangha to practice as a monastic disciple of the Buddha. So before we become monks and nuns, we go through a process of vetting, basically, and you're asked a series of questions. And one of those questions is, are you human or not? And if the answer is no, I'm not human, I'm a ghost, or I'm the Naga King, then you can't go further. You can't take the novice precepts, and certainly you won't be able to take the full ordination precepts. So those were the first three difficulties. So think of those three realms as the first three. So now we go to the fourth difficulty that one must avoid. And excuse me. And that is to avoid being reborn in the longevity heavens. So the longevity heavens here, Venerable Yin-Shun explains that there are a few locations. So first in the highest realm, the formless realm. So remember, within our Buddhist cosmology, we've got the desire realm, which is where we exist in. And above that, there's the form realm. And then above that, there is the formless realm. So in the formless realm, there are 4 heavens, and these are the heavens of limitless space, limitless consciousness, the heaven of nothingness, and the heaven of neither conceptualization nor non-conceptualization. And then if we go back to the form realm, we have the heaven called non-conceptualization. So in these 5 levels of heavens, the lifespan is extremely, extremely long. So, for example, in the heaven of neither conceptualization nor non-conceptualization, so this is what we regard as the absolute max, the highest heaven in the formless realm. The lifespan there is said to be 80,000 great eons. So in that time, our Earth our whole solar system would have formed and deteriorated, collapsed, and another system would have formed again several times, actually. So in these heavens, the beings don't actually have the opportunity to encounter the Dharma. So that's why it's one of the difficulties we must avoid. Now, in the Ekotarika Agama, in the chapter on the 8 difficulties, it says that as long as one is born in the heavenly realms, so it doesn't have to be these 5 highest levels of heaven, any of the heavenly realms, these are all called the longevity heavens. And in these places, it is extremely rare to hear the Dharma and practice it. So this is the 4th difficulty that we need to try and avoid. So basically, if you think about it, the first 4 difficulties, if we keep in mind the 6 realms, we need to avoid being born above in the heavens, and we need to avoid being born below in the 3 lower realms, or the 3 evil realms. So the human realm, being in the middle, is considered to be the one place, the only life form where we can encounter the Buddha and his teachings and be able to practice it in the way that the Buddha had intended and instructed. So after being born as a human, which we all fortunately have attained, there are also 4 difficulties as a human being that we must also avoid. Oops. Sorry. So the 5th difficulty is to be born in a time and place where the Buddha Dharma does not prevail. Basically, of course, if you think about it, if you're born in a time when there is no Dharma, you won't be able to encounter it. So that means we must avoid being born in a time before a Buddha has arrived and after the extinction of his Dharma. So we're lucky. We're still in a time where the Buddha Dharma prevails, even though the Buddha is no longer with us. So if one is born in a time before the coming of a Buddha or after the extinction of his Dharma, even with a human form, there's no way to encounter, learn, and practice the Dharma. Now, even being born as a human and being born in a time when the Buddha Dharma prevails, this is the next difficulty we have to avoid. We must make sure we're born in a central place. So this is the 6th difficulty. And here, central place is a relative position to a boundary place or an outskirt, or a border place. Central place is any location where you can find the Dharma, where there is a Sangha promoting the Dharma. The opposite position is the boundary place, the outskirts, the border places, and this is where you can't find the Dharma, or this is where there isn't a Sangha present to spread the Dharma there. So if one is born as a human but lives in a boundary area where you can't find the Dharma, there's no access to the Dharma. So even if you're born in a time when the Buddha existed or when his Dharma still exists, not being a central place, you won't have the chance to meet with the Dharma. So I like to think of it as, when the Buddha was present, if you think about how precious it was that a Buddha actually was present in our world back in the 6th century BCE. But only the people in northern India would be considered as being born in a central place, living in a central place. So the people of ancient Greece and Egypt during that time, they didn't even know they were living in such a wonderful time where a Buddha was actually present. So these people would have no idea to go and seek the Dharma, even though they could have had the chance to meet with and learn from the Buddha himself. And there is an actual saying that even in India at that time, only 1/3 of the people knew about the Buddha and was able to approach and hear his Dharma, while 1/3 knew about the Buddha but has never met him and has never heard his Dharma. And 1/3 of the people in India at that time didn't even know the Buddha existed and never heard of his Dharma. So being born at the right time and living in the right place are also important aspects that we need to consider. And these are part of the 8 difficulties. So now, having avoided the difficulties above, the first 6 difficulties, we must also possess a complete and healthy body. Being born as a human, living in a central place and at the right time, if we're born blind, deaf, mute, or mentally disabled, or lacking in certain abilities to comprehend things, again, it will be very hard for us to learn the Dharma, even if we live next door to a monastery. Now, in our modern times, we've tried to breach the gap a bit with the invention of Braille and sign language. For people who are blind, they can read the Dharma. For people who are deaf, through sign language, they can learn about the Dharma. But again, the access to the Dharma is limited by what has been translated into Braille and sign language. So we've got difficulty accessing all the teachings in English alone, let alone then having access to them in Braille and sign language. So these are also aspects we need to try and reflect on and avoid. We must have a complete and healthy body. So that's the 7th difficulty we need to avoid. And the final 8th difficulty is that if we're born into a family of extremists with erroneous views, or if we grow up in an environment or a social setting, a family setting of very strict other religious beliefs, and we adopt those, or simply if we mix in with the wrong people, bad spiritual guides, and develop evil and wrong views. All of these aspects. So even with a healthy body and mind, being in the right time and place as a human being, if we hold wrong views, the habitual conditioning from these wrong views will actually become an obstruction to our affinity with meeting with the Buddha. And that's why the verse says, without erroneous views. You might think about this and say, well, in our modern times, there are plenty of instances where people born and raised in a strict Catholic or Christian or even, some other religion, they discovered the Triple Gem when they're older. Given the freedom of religion we now have, they can make the decision to convert and learn the Dharma and practice. But again, if you think about it in terms of the path of practice, if we can avoid this situation in the first place and be born into a healthy Buddhist family, then learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma will just be a lot easier. So these are the 8 situations, and these are commonly called the 8 difficulties that obstruct one from learning the Dharma, encountering the Dharma. And according to the Sanskrit, it literally is translated as the 8 leisureless situations. So this refers to 8 types of situations where one does not have the opportunity to encounter and or learn and practice the Buddha Dharma, which ultimately means we won't be able to experience the freedom of liberation. So therefore, we don't have any leisure of freedom. Now, for some people, especially those who have learned Buddhism for a while, they can fall into the trap of taking the Dharma for granted and begin to become preoccupied with other things and maybe slack off even after a few years. I like to think of it as eating the same thing over and over again. So I remember when we first had pizza, it was like, as a kid, wow, this is so great. I could have this every day. And when my father, being a bit lazy, really did buy frozen pizza and we had it every day, after a week, I was saying, I don't want pizza anymore. So this actually can happen when you're learning the Dharma. You at the beginning, when you meet with a good group of people, you're very diligent. You meet regularly, almost weekly or even daily, if you can, and you study the teachings, you discuss the Dharma. But if you don't balance your practice and learning in a way that is that you can endure a long-term practice, sometimes you end up falling into a lazy slump regarding your Dharma practice. And if you reflect on that, when you fall into a situation like this, you know, one way to encourage yourself is to think about these 8 difficulties and think about what a precious situation you have. So why am I wasting it? Another way you can think of it, if you're mathematically minded, is according to world data, there are 8 billion people in the world, but only 500 million are Buddhist or claim to be Buddhist. So that's just over 6%. So 6%, we are part of the 6% in the world that are Buddhist. However, within that 6%, how many are actually than practitioners? That's an even smaller percentage. So we are very precious, and what we have is really rare. We should seize the opportunity whenever we can. So all of you have avoided the 8 difficulties and have met with the Triple Gem. So I hope you can realize actually how fortunate we are compared to all the other beings in the 6 realms. So we're very blessed, especially to be able to meet with Venerable Yin-Shun's teachings, which I find are one of the most easily understood and one of the most helpful teachings for us to practice and guide us on this path. So that was the 8 difficulties. Now we come to the next verse. So here, Venerable Yin-Shun explains why the human form is so superior. Now, many of the other religions we have actually place emphasis on the heavens. They look to the heavens as their ideal and their preferred place. And if you think about the various different cultures in their mythologies, the gods are always portrayed as being much more superior to humans. However, with respect to learning and practicing the Dharma, we need to understand that as human beings, we have a special place in this universe, and we have qualities that surpass even the gods. And this is summarized in the verse, which says, "As we cycle from one life to the next, being born as a human is hardest to come by. Memory, moral conduct, and determination, these 3 qualities surpass that of the heavenly beings." So as human beings, you know, we do have qualities that are even better than the gods. Now, there are people, you know, because of their life experience, maybe it's not so pleasant or it's a bit difficult, they get depressed. Depression is just as bad a pandemic as COVID, I would say, in our situations nowadays. And they see very little purpose in their human existence. So when we reflect on this, we should actually see, well, even though my situation is not so good, my environment may be poor and so forth, but I am a human. I have a healthy body. I have the ability to learn the Dharma and practice it. So these are ways we can actually motivate ourselves and reason with ourselves even. So using the rational aspect to encourage ourselves when we fall into a bit of a slump, or when we lose faith in ourselves and think it's too hard, it's too hard. So we need to understand that as we're cycling from one life to the next, within the 5 realms or the 6 realms. So sometimes in the scriptures and the Buddhist teachings, you hear us talk about the 5 realms, and sometimes you'll read about the 6 realms and then you'll get confused. So is it 5 or is it 6? The difference here is where they class the asuras. If the asuras are classed on their own, then you have the 5 realms. If the asuras are grouped in with either the heavenly beings or with the, sometimes with the ghost as the higher level ghost beings, then you'll have the 5 realms. So it's referring to the same thing. It's just a matter of whether the asuras are given their own grouping or not. But within the 5 realms or within the 6 realms, being born as a human is actually really hard to come by. And so knowing that we have this human form, we actually should make the most of it while we can, because as the saying goes, life is short. If we don't value this human form while we have it and we waste away our lives, then we've actually wasted a very precious opportunity. So we can actually appreciate and value this human form by investigating 2 aspects. Now, one aspect is from the bigger picture of the 6 realms. Being born as a human is rare. And even though we keep saying that, for us who are actually humans, we might think it's a given. But if you accept the cosmos description, the cosmology described in Buddhism, we need to understand that there are other realms, not just the human realm and the animal realms. So it's usually described with 2 analogies. So one analogy is that being born in the evil realms, so this is just the evil realms, okay, not even including the wholesome realms. Being born into the evil realms of the hells, animals, and hungry ghost is like the amount of soil on this earth. While being born in the wholesome realms, which are the heavenly and the human realms, that number is like the amount of soil caught in one's fingernails. So that's, if you think about that, that's quite a rare percentage to attain. It's even harder than winning the lotto, the jackpot. So, but one thing we need to understand is even being born in the wholesome realms, such as the heavenly realms, and you're able to enjoy the bliss of a heavenly life, once that life is over, many beings will have to regress to some of the lower realms. So this rarity is also described using the analogy of a blind tortoise who lives in the ocean and surfaces once every 100 years to take a breath. So this tortoise can hold its breath for 100 years, and every 100 years it comes to the surface to take a breath. But when it does so, it somehow manages to poke its head through a hole in a piece of driftwood. So the chances of such an event occurring is extremely low. And that's what is used to describe the chances of gaining a human form. So as we cycle from one life to the next, the likelihood of being born as a human is very low. The percentage is very low. And for all of us, we have managed to hit that jackpot. So even though life is not perfect, it has its ups and downs. We have to endure hardship, suffering, setbacks. Nonetheless, this human form is indeed very hard to come by. And because we have already attained it, it may be hard to imagine anything else because all we know in this life is how to be a human. The Buddha is telling us that as a human, it's a very rare opportunity. This is a very rare opportunity, and we need to develop confidence in ourselves to make the most of this life. Now, the other aspect to contemplate and appreciate and value this human form is to investigate and ponder about the special qualities that humans possess. So according to the sutras, the qualities of memory, moral conduct, and determination in humans are superior to that found in the beings of the 3 lower realms, and can also surpass that of the heavenly beings. So as humans, we have qualities that surpass the beings in all of the other realms. So the first is memory. Human beings can remember their past and preserve historical experiences. So consequently, because of this quality, we have the ability to contemplate, to reflect, and we have the ability to infer things. And so these type of mental, rational activities are much more advanced in humans than any of the other beings. And so this is called the superiority of memory. The second special human quality is moral conduct. So as human beings, we can disregard our own advantages and exert effort of self-control to undertake practices of moral conduct. So wholesome moral practices can help our bodies and minds to become virtuous and accord with reason and the truth. And this is beneficial to society at large. If you imagine everyone behaving in this way, how wonderful society would be. So for the sake of upholding moral conduct, as human beings, we are even willing to tame or sacrifice ourselves. So this is the spirit of morality in human beings. And this spirit or this quality is especially great. And this is called the superiority of moral conduct. So remember, with these qualities, because you're thinking here, well, you know, a lot of people are quite selfish and harmful to others. Yes, they are. But what we're saying is that as a human, we have this potential to be great beings because we want to uphold the highest level of ethics, the highest levels of good and virtuous behavior. And the third special quality is determination. And here, determination also includes aspects of endurance and tolerance. So humans, for the sake of achieving a specific goal, are able to endure all sorts of hardships. And they can, if they wanted to, diligently and courageously continue to move forward and never rest until that goal is achieved. And this is called the superiority of determination. So the Confucians also consider that human beings have 3 great virtues, and they are the virtues of knowledge, benevolence, and courage. And these are actually similar to the 3 qualities taught by the Buddha. So from the table, this is trying to show you how the different teachings from Buddhism and Confucianism can actually marry up. Now, after contemplating these 2 aspects, which is how rare it is to be born as a human, and the fact that humans have these 3 special qualities that surpass all the other beings in the 6 or 5 realms, we need to realize that among all beings, we are very precious. And it's only when we value what we have and we utilize these great qualities of being human, then we can diligently progress forward and achieve personal advancement. We can become forefathers in our fields. We can become noble beings. We can become enlightened beings. We can become Buddhas. So the perfection of these three unique qualities, the perfection of these human qualities, can also be viewed as the perfection of Buddha's virtues, the virtues of prajna, which corresponds to wisdom and memory, the virtue of great compassion of the Buddhas, and the virtue of great vows of the Buddhas. So the sutras teach us that when a heavenly being's life comes to an end, even though they have very long lifespan, eventually it will come to an end. When a heavenly being's life is coming to an end, they have certain manifestations, certain signs start to appear. And the other heavenly beings seeing those signs will know that, oh, their life is here, their life as a heavenly being is coming to an end, and they will wish them, may you be born in a place that is peaceful. And this peaceful place that they're referring to is actually the human realm. So for the heavenly being, gaining the human form is actually something to look forward to. So for us, already having this human form, being born in this peaceful place, we should make the most of it. We should really see how fortunate and how blessed we are. So in that sense, you can also give yourself a bit of a pat on the back for the virtues you have accumulated in your past, such that you can be born as a human being, avoid all the 8 difficulties, and be able to learn and practice the Dharma here and now. Okay, so I think this is a good place for us to take our 10-minute break, and we'll begin the next session looking at the next verse. So I've put up the next slide in case those of you who were back early, you can copy it down now. And so this verse tells us what is hard to attain has been attained, and so diligently undertake Dharma practices. Do not waste time like one entering a treasure trove who leaves empty-handed and sighs with regret. So I hope that after the last lesson, it's been drilled into you that the human form is very precious, very hard to attain. And we should recognize that we're very blessed to have attained it in this life. And the triple gem is just as hard, if not harder, to come by. And yet we have created the causes and conditions in the past that have allowed us to meet with the Dharma and to meet with good Dharma friends and teachers. So realizing what a precious opportunity we have, we should make the most of it by diligently learning and undertaking the Dharma practices. So from this, you can see in terms of the structure, Venerable Yin-Shun is giving us encouragement. So remember that a good spiritual guide not only gives good advice, but gives encouragement. So in his teachings, he also tries to incorporate that aspect. Now, when you read the sutras, and some of you may or may not have come across this, but the sutras tell us that life arises between each breath. So this is just to show us how impermanent life can be. When the next breath doesn't come, again, you know, for us, breathing seems to be a given, but if you think about it, when you breathe in or breathe out, and you can't take the next breath, that basically means that's the end of this life. So when we fully recognize the significance of impermanence, then we will not so easily put things off till tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, or some future time, because we always think we will have time. So we should try and seize every moment and make good strides to advance in our learning and our practice. And only in this way can we enjoy more and more of the Dharma's benefits in this life. If we carelessly waste away our time, then once the next breath doesn't arise and you can no longer immerse in the learning of the Dharma and the practice of the Dharma, you will feel a bit of regret, because having wasted this opportunity is like entering a treasure trove, and you're so stunned and in awe of all the rare treasures that you forget to actually go and collect them. So by the time comes and you have to leave, you leave empty-handed. So the only thing you can do then is to sigh in despair. So don't fall into that trap. Exert effort to learn and practice the Dharma when we are healthy, when we are able to, when the Dharma is present, because it's no use crying when the time comes for us to leave and we've then realized we haven't done as much as we could have. So here, I'd like to also share an experience with you when I first encountered Buddhism and started learning about the Dharma. I was very eager and I approached it at full speed. So I was at the monastery every Saturday and Sunday for evening services. And if they had other services in the day, I'd effectively be there the whole day from morning till night. And, when I went to work, I had a 1-hour train trip either way. So I'd be reading Dharma books or I'd be chanting, memorizing sutras and so forth. Basically, in any spare time, I was doing something Dharma related. So it got to the point where I even stopped watching TV and listening to music. And if I had to watch, I'd be watching Buddhist related programs. And if I was listening, I'd be listening to Dharma teachings, basically. So, but because I didn't balance my teaching, my practice and learning properly, after a few years, after about 6-7 years, I hit a brick wall and I burnt out, basically. So I did a complete 180 flip. I skipped off to Japan to live for a year. And during that year, I did a lot of normal things, as in go shopping, go traveling, sightseeing and so forth. So, and I avoided anything Dharma related. So when I think back at that, that was a very crucial time, because had I have allowed myself to continue my aversion to the Dharma, I don't think I'd be here in these robes today. But fortunately for me, my past study and learning of the Dharma kept reminding me, I really have to get over this brick wall. I really need to knock down this brick wall and get back on track. So eventually I met with good teachers that helped me to get back on track, but it took me a good 2 years, including the 1 year off in Japan and then coming back from Japan. It took me another year to really get back on track in terms of my learning of the Dharma. So from this, I hope you can learn from my experience and not fall into this trap of being burnt out. Take things with a balanced approach, especially as a lay person. It's fine to do normal things. It's fine to do things with your family. It's fine to go on holidays. It's fine to watch TV, listen to music, but just balance it with your Dharma learning and practice. So, and that's why I want to share with you an important teaching from chapter 5 in The Way to Buddhahood. So here, Venerable Yin-Shun teaches us that as a bodhisattva, there are 4 important practices that can help us maintain endurance for the long term with respect to the practice. So in the context of chapter 5, this endurance is about multiple lifetimes and eons of lifetimes. But we can reflect on that in this present life. And these 4 practices are confidence, determination, joy, and rest. So what I want to point out is the practice of rest. When one is able to develop all 4 qualities, then the power you gain from these qualities will help you to maintain diligence. And the 4 qualities include the aspect of rest. So you need to be able to know when to take some time out to properly rest, refuel, recharge, re-energize, so that you can then continue with your learning and practice of the Dharma. Because remember, this path is lifelong, and if you make the Bodhisattva vow, this path is several lives, several eons of lives long. So we need to know, to have confidence in the Dharma, to have determination, steadfast determination in our own vows to accomplish Buddhahood. We need to take delight in what we're doing, in what we're learning and practicing, and we need to know to take rest breaks as well. So now we go to the first half of the next verse. And here it says, after hearing the Dharma, one should make aspirations. According to different capacities, different paths manifest. So when we talk about learning and practicing the Dharma, some people may think, what is the purpose or final goal? And someone may answer, isn't it obvious? It's nirvana. But the reality is that some people learn the Dharma, but can still be unclear about what they want from it. Therefore, after one associates with good spiritual guides and hears the Dharma, one should make aspirations and vows. And these aspirations include aspirations to learn and practice the Dharma. So you need to think of your aspirations as your guiding motivation behind why you're willing to exert effort to learn the Dharma. And when you make these aspirations and reflect on them regularly, your vows, your aspirations can help you stay on track to eventually realize your goals with respect to learning the Dharma. So when you make aspirations, you're actively turning your attention to what do I want from learning the Dharma, from practicing the Dharma? What do I hope to gain? So due to different spiritual capacities, there are different people with different goals, and at different journeys along the path, at different points along the path, the goals may begin to change as well. So you need to constantly reflect on your goals and your aspirations. So it's important to think about your aspirations regularly and reflect on them regularly. And why is it? Because when you make aspirations, this is establishing your goal. And when you have your goal and you're clear about your goal, this drives all of your actions and behavior. It's the ambition that moves you towards your practice and your final destination. So aspiration is not a mental activity that arises randomly. It's something you need to put in effort to think about. What do I want from this? And then think about, well, how do I go about achieving this? So when we make aspirations, we are developing our conviction, we're developing our vows, and we want to make these vows steadfast so that we utilize our quality of determination to then strive towards achieving these goals and vows. So you can think of it a bit like an athlete. So someone could be very athletic, very good at a certain sport, but if they don't have any goal, they'll just be training with no real purpose. Compared to a similar person who's also very athletic, but they have the goal of becoming world champion or Olympic gold medalist. With that goal, they will then start to be able to plan. What do I need in terms of training, in terms of financial support? What must I complete in terms of prerequisite competitions and so forth? So you'll actually start having a clearer direction of what you need to do, compared to the athlete who's just physically adept at certain sports, but has no direction about where they want to take this skill that they have. So that's what our aspirations do for us. Our aspirations, our vows are helping us. We know we want to get there. So then we can start to plan. What do I need? What qualities must I gain? What must I learn in order to eventually get there? So that's why having goals and having aspirations and making vows is very important on the path. So the Dharma is essentially one path, but it can embody adaptations to cater to different spiritual capacities. And these adaptations will manifest in the form of many different paths that we can choose to walk. So when the Buddhas or the great Bodhisattvas give us teachings and they teach the Dharma, if there is only one person in the audience, then naturally they will expound the Dharma in a way that caters specifically to that particular person's spiritual capacity. So in other words, they have a tailor-made Dharma talk just for that one person, if there's only one person in the audience. If there are many people in the audience, then the Buddhas and the great Bodhisattvas will utilize their inconceivable skill, their skill of the universal voice. And what this results in is that each person in the audience, when they hear the Dharma teaching, what they hear suits them. So this quality of the universal voice, when a Buddha or a great Bodhisattva teaches the Dharma, this quality is such that even though the Buddha is saying, is producing one Dharma talk, everyone in the audience will hear that Dharma talk in a way that suits them, that will help them and is most beneficial to them. So this is a very special quality that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas possess. And that's why it says, the Buddha uses a universal voice to expound the Dharma, while the audience receives the teaching that accords to their capacity. So if you find a really good spiritual guide that has the universal voice, then what they teach you will be suitable to you. Now, this is a wonderful skill to have. And again, we can reflect on, well, how can I develop this skill? But on the other aspect, we need to realize that this is a skill of the Buddhas and the great Bodhisattvas. And so, for many of the teachers that we will encounter, especially in our current era and time, many of the Dharma teachers, including myself, we don't have the skill of the universal voice. So, although I'd like to develop it, but at present I don't. So when you hear teachings from Dharma teachers in the present time, you need to then start to reflect. Does this teaching suit me? Is this what I am capable of now? So you need to also start reflecting on where you are and what teachings you hear suits you or work for you best in your present time with your present spiritual foundation. So the reason why we're pointing this out is because some people, when they hear Dharma teachings, they will then think, wow, this teacher is so great. This teaching is so great. I have to practice it. So, but we need to remember the teachings that are given without the universal voice may not necessarily be the method that suits everyone in the audience. So this is the same for when you study yourself and you pick up a different sutra or a different treatise or a different Dharma book. So the choice can sometimes be quite random, or you can make it in some sort of a sequential order or by recommendation. Regardless, one cannot assume that whatever you pick up and begin reading, that is the right method for you in your current state. So you need to exercise a bit of judgment, think about, does this work for me? And the best way is to try it out. So I'm not trying to discourage you from adhering to the different Dharma teachings you hear from different Dharma teachers. What I'm trying to point out to you is when you listen to Dharma teachings and it gives you delight, and when you practice it, you know, you can actually see benefits. You can see yourself improve. You can see yourself developing compassion and not being easily angered, frustrated, and so forth. Then that teaching is suitable to you. But if you're applying a teaching that, you know, causes you a bit of grief, then sometimes it's okay to say, well, maybe I'm not ready for this teaching yet. I can leave it aside, find another teaching that's a bit more suitable now. And maybe as my spiritual foundation develops, I can come back to that teaching. So in my own experience, I remember that there was a time when the monastery I used to go to, and this was when I was still a layperson, they held a Pure Land retreat. And this was the very first Amitabha Pure Land retreat. And we had some great teachers invited over. And everyone was saying, wow, this master is so renowned for X, Y, and Z. And so they were, you know, they were treated like superstars. And I was very respectful. I admired them for their practice, but for somehow it just didn't really click with me. I went to the 7-day retreat. I did what was required, and we had to chant the Amitabha Buddha's name at least, I think it was 3,000 times each day, and we had to do a minimum of 300 prostrations. So this homework requirement was in between the actual lessons. So the actual time to get this homework done was, we didn't have all day basically, because we had group sessions where you were chanting together, prostrating together, and you had Dharma lessons. So after finishing that Dharma retreat, and I didn't make 300 prostrations each and every day, a lot of the other people at the monastery said, oh, I love this practice, I'm going to continue. And then each week when we see each other at the monastery, they said, oh, I made 10,000 chants each day now, and I do 1,000 prostrations each day. And it was becoming more like a competition to see who could outdo each other. But for me, something just didn't feel right. It really felt like I was a criminal even, because I was questioning, do we have to do so much? And eventually I spoke to a few of the venerables about my concerns and my dilemma. And then they told me, well, you know, maybe you're not ready for the practice yet. You can put it aside. You can practice a little bit when it makes you happy and when it gives you fulfillment. But if it gets to the point where it becomes a bit of a burden, then you also need to know the skill of putting it down, but not forgetting it. Because maybe in some future time, when you're ready to receive this practice, then you can pick it up again. So remember that any teachings you hear, unless it's from the Buddha and the great bodhisattvas who are using a universal voice, not all the teachings may be actually suited to you. So it's okay. It's okay. So other ways we can reflect on this is, in certain areas, there are dominant practices. So in Tibet, the Tantric or the Vajrayana practice is the most popular. In Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka, the Theravada practice is popular. And in China, at a certain time, the Chan practice, which equates to the Zen practice. Chan is the Chinese word, Zen is the Japanese word. The Chan practice was popular. But we then have to think, is it really the case that everyone in Tibet is suited to the Tantric practice? Is everyone in Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka suited to the Theravada practice? And is everyone in China at that particular time? Are they ready? Do they have the spiritual foundation for the Chan practice? And of course, the answer is no. Often, our aspirations, our vows will also dictate what type of a spiritual foundation we have. So if your vows is really just to have a good rebirth in the future, then of course practices that will get you to arahatship will feel a bit uncomfortable, because that's not where your aspiration lies. So it's important to have aspirations and make vows. And it's important to understand that your aspirations and your vows will affect and determine your spiritual capacity, and therefore what teachings and practices suit you the best. So I'm going through these last few slides a bit quick because of time. In summary, what I'm trying to say is, please be careful when you choose your practice and your path. Choose one that suits your spiritual capacity in your current time, and know that your spiritual capacity can improve and develop as you learn and practice. So don't just follow a particular practice because you hear it's much better or you hear it's so superior. You need to reflect on your own aspirations as well. So when we're learning, don't get peer pressured like I was into adopting the Amitabha Pure Land practice. Don't let yourself be peer pressured into that. And when you're practicing a certain method and you come across some difficulties, don't just try and suppress it either. Talk to your fellow Dharma friends. Seek the advice of a Sangha member. Sometimes just talking through it with someone else can then help you actually sort out, is this time for me to put aside this teaching for now and develop more in certain aspects so that I can then maybe try this practice again later. So all of the practices in the Dharma are effective for achieving certain goals, but it's a matter of finding the method that suits you at this present time with your present spiritual capacity. So I hope that from my experience as a practitioner, you can then definitely try different practices and different methods, because only through trial and error will you be able to then see which practice is more comfortable for me, which practice helps me to advance much more quickly or more steadily. And through this trial and error practice, you will then start to see yourself a bit more clearly in terms of what your direction is. And then you might be able to then advance yourself in terms of your aspirations. Make higher goals, make greater goals as well. So I will end today's lesson here. And tomorrow's lesson, we will begin by looking at the 3 major groups of aspirations so that you can have an idea of perhaps, where your aspirations are at the moment and where your aspirations could be going forward. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you all again tomorrow. And remember to do your homework and think about the structure of chapter 2 with all the verses that we have looked at, and think about what are the deeper messages we can gain from the structure of chapter 2. And we will go through that tomorrow as well. So tomorrow will be a bit of a marathon because I'm trying to finish off a lot of the material that I had prepared for these 4 days. Okay, thank you everybody, and I'll see you all tomorrow.